Hi there, I'm John Bradford. I'm CEO and founder of Park Avenue Properties. We're a management firm located in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we manage about 1,500 properties in 3 states. I'm also the founder and a pet lover of PetScreening.com. And lastly, I have a unique skill set. I serve in the North Carolina House of Representatives where I serve as the Deputy Whip. Now in property management, we all are facing people and pets. Pets can cause property damage. We're dealing with assistance animals and service animals and potential fraud. This video course that you're about to watch was recorded at the Atlanta NARPM chapter, where I was asked to come down and talk about the business risks associated with dealing with pets and also dealing with service animals and assistance animals. And assistance animals are companion animals, therapy animals, comfort animals, all the buzzwords. In this video and this class, I cover a variety of things. What are the risks with household pets, your everyday dogs and cats? How can you mitigate risk for your firm around pets? And then specifically, when we're talking about HUD and the Fair Housing Act, I talk about the differences between fair housing, HUD, and the ADA. What are the differences between service animals versus assistance animals? What are some of the things you should do at a firm? What are advisable? And then also, what are inadvisable things? What are the things not to do? I hope you enjoyed this class. I think you'll learn a lot. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.
He owns Park Avenue Properties in Charlotte. They have an obscene amount of doors, so he knows what he's doing. He is also with the state representative for the House in Charlotte, for North Carolina, I'm sorry. And he is got 4 kids, and he risked his life getting here, so everybody give him a round of applause to John Bradford.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. You know, I have to admit, I was actually in a great mood until Brian stood up and said, "Roll Tide," because I'm a Clemson Tiger, and they did roll over us. Yes, so is there a safe place I can go to? So my name is John Bradford. I am from Charlotte, just a usual 3-hour-and-a-half drive up the road. A little bit longer this trip, but if I did not leave during the middle of the storm, I would not have gotten here because the roads were going to freeze over. So I'm happy to be here. I think I drove like this. I've never done 10 and 2 in my life since driver's ed in high school, but I was hanging on as I was coming down that road. But I made it safely. I had a nice dinner last night with the 2 Roberts, Robert Gilstrap and Robert Locke, and a few others that I think we're going to try to join, but I know things came up with the weather, and no, certainly that's understandable. And we actually went to one restaurant, didn't have enough servers, so we had to go to a different restaurant, and it actually worked out great because I think the second choice was probably the right choice, so we had a good time. So thank you to the 2 Roberts for joining me. I didn't have to eat alone. So I am here to talk to you about a problem in the industry that every one of us, and we're not really exclusive to this, anybody that deals with housing. So whether you're multifamily, student housing, retirement housing, vacation housing, or single-family residential like what most of us do in this room, the topic we're going to talk about today is usually number 1 or 2 on the list. I have, obviously I am part of the NARPM family, been in the organization for over a decade, served on the board, started a management firm, so I feel like I understand the issue well. I also, to the remarks of talking about state legislation, sort of bundled it up into this presentation. So we're going to get right to it. So I call this the 2 Ps. The 2 Ps that impact what we do are people and pets. Now people, we do a lot when we're looking at people, when we screen people, right? What do we do with people? We look at what? Credit scores. We look at background, employment, income. We sure do a lot of digging deep on people because we want to make sure that they have the credit worthiness, et cetera, to get into our properties. We know people can obviously damage properties. We know their children can damage properties. They can grab a box of crayons and go to town on the walls. I mean, I'm sure you all have your own horror stories, but people can really damage properties. And then the other P, which is pets. Pets can damage properties. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Pets, it might be invisible damage, but I promise you, if you take a piece of tape and put it on the carpet and you go around the edge of the room, you will find dog hair, cat hair, and while it may be innocent in nature, it is a risk for us. I am a pet lover. I love pets. I absolutely love pets. And if I rented a house from any one of you, I feel pretty confident when I moved out, I would deliver it back to you in excellent condition. But I could not guarantee that you wouldn't find a hair in some corner of the piece of tape, because I just can't prevent that. But not every pet owner is the same. Pets are half the problem. Pet owners are the other half of the problem. And their care of the pet, very similar to a child that's screaming at a restaurant. Yep. You know, it's not the child's fault, right? The child's just being a child. It falls back on the parent, and I sort of believe that same philosophy holds true with pets. So two pieces, people and pets. These cause property damage. Let's talk about pets versus animals, because definitionally, from a definition perspective, there's a difference, right? Pets, first of all, are not a protected class. You can look at a pet and go, nope, don't like, you have too much fluff, I don't want to rent you. Or you can say, your tail is too long, don't want to rent you. They're not a protected class. Yeah. I don't see that changing, but you never know. Okay? We shall see. Pets have feelings too. But pets are not a protected class. You have the unilateral right to turn anyone down about a pet that you want to. And you don't have to feel guilty about it. That is your unilateral right as a housing provider, okay? Denying them is not discrimination.
Period. It's just not. Even if it is a former dog that worked for a police department that someone is raising, and it was a dog that was in action, right? Denying that dog is not a protected class, if it's a pet, okay? Let's talk about animals. Animals are not always pets. The definition of an animal, from a fair housing perspective, is basically an assistive device to one's quality of life. So when we talk about animals today, we are talking about animals under the definition of Fair Housing Act, which means an animal is not a pet. This is why you cannot charge pet fees, pet rent, because the word there is what? Pet. These are not pets, these are animals. These are, think of someone, the most obvious example would be someone in a wheelchair. They need the wheelchair as an assistive device. In the world of fair housing, if it's truly a service animal or an assistance animal, it's an assistive device to their quality of life. So those are the two definitions of pets versus animals, okay? Now, I have broken down sort of pets. We're going to talk about pets now, so we're pivoting to pets. So these are the ones you can say no to for any reason. Okay, we'll get to the animals in a moment. When I think of pets, right, we talk about risk. There are risks with all kinds of pets. There's risk with fish tanks. Why? Is the fish going to come out and nibble on your toes? No, what is it? It's the tank, right? It's the tank. Now, a tank is not a pet, but a lot of firms will put that under a pet policy. If you have a tank that's over, I hear 20 gallons is a number I hear a lot. I hear all kinds of numbers. 10 gallons, you pick the number, that's a risk. But when we think about pets, I try to break it down to the ABCs. Let's talk about the A word, affirmations. And another A word would be perhaps like affidavit, right? Affirmations, affidavit. This is getting the owner of the pet codified on the record for you, to protect your owner. Because we all are third-party property managers. Maybe you happen to manage some of your own stuff, but for the most part, we manage someone else's asset. You are hired by them to protect them, but you also need to protect yourself. And the A is getting the owner on the record formally, which isn't a telephone call necessarily. It's not a one-line email, although that's helpful, but the minute the employee leaves and you don't archive their email and you try to find it 6 years later, 3 years later, statute of limitations, that email becomes a problem. So getting them on the record, we'll call it the A's. The B is the behavioral, understanding the behavioral past of a pet. And it's as simple as understanding what has this pet done. Has it bit an animal and caused injury? Has it bit a person and caused injury? Has it ever been quarantined? Why? You can quarantine a pet for a lot of reasons. It can be a mandatory military quarantine because they're coming back from overseas. That's not a bad thing, but shouldn't you know if it's been quarantined? Usually if it's been quarantined, there's a reason that you need to know, because there's one specific type of quarantine that you really want to know, and that's an unvaccinated pet bite quarantine, because then you obviously know you got a biter, and we probably don't want knowing biters in our properties. The C would be compatibility. This would be the common sense stuff, like, is the dog too big for my property? So if you happen to manage a multifamily asset and you have 3 units stacked on top of one another, you probably don't want a 140-pound St. Bernard running around upstairs, so you would do a weight restriction, right? Therefore, is the St. Bernard compatible with a 3-story condo type development? That would be a compatibility issue. Or What kind of dog is it? Is it a guard dog breed? Do you have a guard dog breed policy? So you can see the compatibility factor about the pet is important. So ABCs, we'll talk about each one. Let's talk about the A, affirmations, think affidavit as well. These are just questions to provoke your thought about how you're handling your pet policies at your firms, okay? Does the owner understand the concept of pet damage? Like, do you really have them acknowledge that they understand what pet damage is? Right? Are you asking that question? Should you be asking that question? I would submit to you, yes. They need to understand pet damage is defined as whatever. Sort of what we've tried to do in my business experience is we say anything that cannot be cleaned with ordinary, readily available household cleaning chemicals would be above normal wear and tear. Meaning if a what are the things called? Black magic eraser or something? Is that what they call it? Like a magic eraser. Okay. But you just this little piece of foam by Clorox or something. Man, that thing's magical. It really is magical. I'll give them that. I don't know what's in that box, but it does clean anything. And I'm not joking. If you didn't try one of them sponges, go get you one. It cleans all kinds of things. But if that magic eraser can't clean it, for example, then chances are it's damaged. Because scratches on the wall, one of those erasers, it might get the smudge, but a smudge is different than a scratch that goes into the wood, for example. So are you getting the owner to say, yes, I understand? Because when they move out and you ding them on their deposit on the reconciliation and you say, well, there were scratch marks around the door frame because the dog was doing this or the cat was doing this when it was locked up at night, and they go, well, that's not normal, or that's normal wear and tear, or that's not pet damage, you can say, oh, but look what you agreed to. It is this, and you have it defined. Another example, do they understand your pet policies? Do they understand that you require, I don't know if you do or not, that if your doggy or cat runs away, disappears, stolen, dies, what other verb can you use where it just goes away, that you need to know. Now, why would that be important for you to know if the said animal that moved in at the beginning of the lease has now disappeared, whether it be, bless its heart, it passed away, or they gave it away, or adopted? Why would you want to know that? Bingo, Joel, because what they do is they go, oh, my 12-year-old family lab passed away in June. What do you think they do in August? They get a puppy. And they don't tell you why.
Because they don't want to pay.
They go, it's still a unit of one, still a dog, 4 legs, tail, ears. Now, do you think that puppy presents a different level of risk for you as a manager than the 12-year-old lab that passed away? So getting them on the record that they understand and agree that if something happens to the original pet, they have an obligation to notify you. This is not because you're going to say no to the puppy, but you have a right to know. But if you don't get them saying that, they're going to plead the fifth and go, oh, well, it's still just one dog. And how are you going to really go offset that? I mean, really, right? So think about that. Insurance, this is probably 50-50. I don't know how many of you have a hard insurance requirement for tenants. Some people do, some people don't. I'm not critical of either one. But if you require insurance, what are you doing to make sure they have it? If you don't require insurance, what are you following up to see if they do have it? So ask the question. This is a simple one. Do you take your pet to the vet? You'd be surprised how many people say no. You'd be surprised. Can anyone think of an example of why they wouldn't take an animal to a vet? I mean, yeah, money, but think what else? Let's talk about pussycats. They grow to be old, 18 years old. Indoor, 18-year-old cat. You think they're going to run that up to the vet? They're going to say, this is an old, feeble cat. We're just going to, the vet says, there's really no need to get it shots. Now, while that may seem very normal, and I get that, that 18-year-old cat might have a feisty day one day. And when your maintenance man comes in, and I have a cat named Bob. Yes, we have a cat named Bob. My twins, girls, who are little tiny things, named it Bob the cat. So Bob the cat. Bob is an interesting kitty. He attacks your ankles. I don't care what you're doing, he attacks your ankles. And he doesn't have claws, but he has teeth. And he will get you, and he will get blood. I mean, I think he's playing, right? But it hurts. So imagine a 16-year-old kitty just getting a burst of energy that's unvaccinated. And, as silly as it sounds, the neighbor's child is over, playing in a property that you're managing, and gets bit, and then they say, well, is the kitty vaccinated? Some states have an automatic quarantine for unvaccinated pets. Now the child, if they drew blood, has to go through rabies shot protocol. Now those parents of the child from the neighbor who's just over at the house that you're managing that was playing is going to lawyer up, and now they're going to come to you, right? So these are, and this is not fear-mongering, but we... What's that?
I didn't say anything. What?
You said you were bit by one of your dogs, weren't you?
I was bit by a neighbor's dog, yeah.
A neighbor's dog. And so...
He's not alive anymore.
Yeah. we shall not ask. Yeah, I'm not fear-mongering. I'm just, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like if something's going to go wrong, it tends to go wrong in my firm. So, I'm just provoking thought. And then let's talk about poop. Let's just talk about it, right? Let's talk about dog poop. Big dogs, their piles of poop are bigger than little dogs. Big piles of poop sitting in the grass, backyard, or front yard. If they're not picking them up, what does that poop do? It makes spots, right? I mean, you'd think it'd be fertilizer, but it doesn't really work that way because it's too much fertilizer, right? So what happens is when they move out and you go in the backyard and you see these poop bombs everywhere, that is not normal wear and tear, folks. You've got to now thatch it. You've got to seed it. That's an expense. Are you asking the question on the record, do you pick up your dog's poop? Do you pick it up within X amount of time? And if you don't pick it up, you understand that this is beyond our normal wear and tear pet policy, right? Get them on the record. This is the time to do it, okay? So these are examples of, because if an owner says no to any of these, you might go, well, you know what? It's not the pet that's the problem, you're the problem. Because if you don't want to pick up the poop, how can the pet pick it up? They're not going to. So I'm not going to rent to you, right? You have the right to do that. So those are examples of affirmations. We can go on and on about A's getting owner on the record. You keep it on a leash at all times. Because guess what? When a dog bites somebody, it's usually not in its own backyard, right? It somehow slipped out, it somehow got out, and when it bites, it never fails. It bites somebody, it comes back to you. Can you point back to the policy where the owner said, yes, I keep my dog on a leash at all times except when it's an enclosed fenced area? And they say, yes, I do that. At least when you get sued, because you will, you can say, well, look what they said. Was the dog behind the fence? Nope. Was it outside the fence? Yep. Was it on a leash? Nope. Their fault, not my fault. You can see how that simple little question can start changing the path for your firm from a liability standpoint. That's just like another example of questions, all right? Let's go to the B, behavioral. Think about the cat or the dog. Let's just start with, does the pet have vaccinations? Yes or no? We're really after which one? Rabies, right? I mean, we love Bordetella and all the other things, heartworms, but we're really after rabies, okay? Not every state is a vaccination state. Georgia, I believe, is. But nonetheless, are you asking just the simple question, is your pet currently vaccinated? Yes or no? If they say yes, okay, one could argue, hey, you asked the question. You could take it a step further and say, now show me proof. Show me the shots or put in the shot records, okay? Now you're starting to get to a lot of work, but it can be done, all right? Then you get them to say, oh, by the way, I understand and agree that if my shot record is about to expire, it's my responsibility to make sure it does not expire while I'm leasing the property. You get them on the record agreeing to that, because if it does expire, and Lord knows it goes and bites someone, you can at least say, well, look, it was vaccinated, they said they'd keep it vaccinated, and they didn't. Again, shifting that liability to them. Okay? We talked about quarantine, we won't revisit that. And then just simple, has your pet ever bitten another pet and caused injury? Okay? Now, they could lie and say nope, fine, but you get them on the record. Because if something did happen and you found out that there was a history of this dog doing this and you wouldn't have known, and then you go back and say, well, you knew this because now we got people coming out of the woodwork going that dog had a bad history over here. You said no, now you know you got a liar on your hands, someone who maliciously misled you, and you got them on the record. Same thing with, has it ever bitten a person? You'd be surprised if you ask the question. People will say, yes, my dog has bitten a person. It was somebody that stuck their hand in front of my dog's face. Okay? Well, at least someone's being honest. The question is, do you want to deal with the fact that if some child walks over to the fence, not that they'd be right, sticks their hands through the fence, because that wouldn't be the right thing to do, but it's a child, and that dog goes, honk. Is that a risk you want to deal with because you knew that the dog had already bitten someone else that stuck their hand in the face, right? Again, how will you ever know it if you don't formally ask the question and get the answer on the record? Lastly, compatibility. Breed. How many of you have breed restrictions? Okay. That's usually about half, you know. I think we all would agree with this statement. Not all pit bulls are bad. They're not. It's really, yes, they are aggressive. Statistically, these are strong, muscular dogs, and if they bite, they're going to bite hard. That's just, I mean, it's what they are. But it doesn't mean that pit bulls are just bad unilaterally. I see firms that have a policy where they say, nope, we're not going to rent to any guard dogs because of the risk, or because their insurance policy has an exclusion for that. And then I see other firms that go, well, my insurance doesn't have an exclusion. I'm open to it as long as the pet has shots, good behavioral history, right? The good news is you get to make that decision. But do you even know? Let me tell you something. If someone says they have a mixed breed or a rescue breed, these are code words in the pet industry. These are code words for they don't want to tell you it's probably a pit bull. So when they say they have a mixed breed or a rescue dog or a mutt or a Heinz 57, it's probably worth getting some photos and looking at it to see, is it 99% pit and 1%, you know, Dalmatian, right? Because there's a giant difference. Because the other thing I'll talk about, this guard dog policy, for all of you that raised your hands that you don't rent to guard dogs, you don't rent to guard dogs when they admit they're guard dog. The rest of the time they tell you it's a mixed breed, and you really don't know. You don't even know that you're inherently violating your own policy, not because you mean to, but because they're just not being forthcoming with you. That's the reality. Okay? You know, does the photo match? I mean, if they say they have a wiener dog, and they send in a photo, and the wiener dog's that big, you go, well, that is an interesting wiener dog. That doesn't match. Something's not adding up. But how would you ever know if you're not getting a picture of the wiener dog? And not just a picture from right up front, but a picture of it standing sideways so you get a perspective shot. Because perspective is everything. I can get really close to your muscle and it's going to look huge. But I can get really far back, it does still look big, just so you know. Okay? But you can see how that can work against you or for you. So getting pictures, plural, can be more important than just getting a picture, singular. You know, the question, is your pet house trained, yes or no? Again, people will be like, no, it's a puppy. Okay, great. Thank you for being forthcoming. Now you know. Puppy. Puppies do what? They pee-pee. Now, granted, their pee-pee might be that big for now, but then it gets a little bit bigger. It goes through the carpet and pad. It's a risk. But you got to ask the question. Let's talk about cats and claws. Clawed cats, I do not suggest you run out and get your cats declawed. Veterinarian, some vets say it's harmful. Other vets say it isn't. I don't know. My vet said no, so we got Bob is declawed, but Bob still bites. That's probably why he bites, because his claws are gone. But nonetheless, if you have a clawed cat with claws, have you ever gone into a property, walked through, and the bedroom door's closed, and right there's just something that happened, and we know it came from something doing this, right? It's a cat or a dog that just scratch. Isn't it worth knowing, is the cat clawed or declawed? Because if it's not declawed, there is a risk, believe it or not. Maybe minimal, but there's a risk. It's a compatibility feature. And then spaying and neutering. Yes, there is a behavioral difference. Okay? So they do calm down when they get spayed or neutered. Mostly the boys in here, okay? Mostly the neutering will calm them down. It's important to know this because a excited animal during, we used to call it in heat, I don't know if that's even appropriate, but you know, there's a time when they're looking to mate with something else. It could be your leg, I don't know. The point is it important to know if a dog is spayed or neutered? To me, if a dog is spayed or neutered or a cat, it tells me a lot about the owner too. That means the owner is willing to spend the money to help control the pet population, etc., and that might be an owner that you go, okay, that's pretty neat. But if one's not spayed or neutered and it's not a puppy, it's different. If it's a puppy, it can't be neutered yet because it's too little. But if it's an 8-year-old dog, it's like, well, why isn't your dog neutered? Like, I would want to know I don't know, you could see how it just kind of goes, that's interesting. Let me look at the photos and see what we got on our hands here. So compatibility, and then the age of the pet and how long have you owned the pet. Do you know how many college kids graduate from college on Saturday and next week they're at the pound getting a dog because they're getting their first foray into life, independency, and they go get a dog and they get one from the pound, which I think is a noble thing to do, and they get a 3-year-old pet and they come in and say, well, my dog's 3 years old. The other question is, well, how long have you owned it? Because if they go, I just got it, well, how do they know what the behavior is? They don't. That is a risk. So knowing those two dates, how old is it? How old have you owned it? You can do a cross check on that, right? listen, some of you have heard me speak before, and I usually go, I love money. I still love money. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I think everybody feels that way. I'm not a greedy guy, but I love money. I love money. I'll say it from the top of the rooftop. Love money, love money. I think there is a way to get more revenue out of pets. And I would just respectfully submit to you that if you have a better understanding of the data set around pets, you can make better decisions as it relates to your pet pricing. Think about it. Knowledge comes from data. Data is power. Everything in this world is data driven, right? You run rent comps because it's data. Researchers want data, to find drugs that fix it. Well, why can't you go get data through your own questioning of some of these things we talk about to start deciding what kind of risk is associated with that owner and that pet, and how are you going to charge them accordingly? And what I would tell you is, since pets are not a protected class, you don't have to charge all pets and pet owners the same. There's no problem charging the big dog that is not neutered, that is 2 years old, a higher rate than the 12-year-old female spayed Shih Tzu. There's no harm in charging more for one than the other, because the risk is much different in those two situations. So I would just submit to you, oh, and by the way, smaller dogs are not always better. I know this. I've seen some data where I go, man, that little thing's a terror, right? So small dogs are not always better. So I would just say that I wouldn't strictly base it on size, although that is an important factor. There's all kinds of fees. Pet deposits, which means they're refundable because of the word deposit. There's pet fees. There's pet rent. Multifamily charges, most multifamily charges pet rent. Single family, I see about half and half. Most single family owners are now charging, it seems like, non-refundable fees. Goes to the owner, split with you, maybe it goes with all of you. The point is, explore your fees based on the risk of the pet. And I think you will see that you can drive more, and it's bottom line revenue. It's not top line revenue, it's really bottom line revenue, because it's just extra money you're going to collect. You're already doing it, you're just going to get a little bit more. So, all right? Let's talk about some statistics. 44% of applicants have household pets. 44%. If an owner says no pets, what are you doing? You're carving out 44% of your lookers. Do you guys get paid if your property's vacant? No. No, no, no. 44% of applicants have pets. What's very interesting is 1.3 pets per person. If you normalize that to a ratio of 1, that means 58% of tenants have one pet only. Right? Now, they have a little more, which is why it's 44%. But the point is, 50% approximately, 1 out of every 2 people have a pet. It's a way of life. If you don't have a pet policy and are pet friendly, you are missing out. And if you have owners who are going, no way, I don't want pets, they are missing out. Because the reality is half the lookers are going to keep on looking. All right? Assistance and service animals, 18%, and I've been measuring this globally, have assistance animals. So about 1 out of 5. I don't know what you see at your firms. Florida, man, they got a lot down there. I think it's warm areas. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. But Florida has a lot. I see Texas has a lot. And Charleston, South Carolina has a high number. But nonetheless, assistance animals, about 1 out of 5. So if you had 10 applications come through, 2 are going to be assistance animals. 8 would be otherwise. So, and then this is interesting too. 81% of your household pets are either medium to high risk. 81% have some risk factor that I would consider to be medium to high. It's there. You're just not asking the right questions to understand the risk. Because I'm telling you, I've been measuring this for almost a year. 81%, which means 81% of the pets you should be charging more money on, because there's extra risk that you're not factoring. No doubt about it. Okay? Here's one. Multi-year tenants with a pet are rarely revisited. Think of your tenant that moved in 2017 in January, and you're doing the renewal right now. How many of you really are revisiting the pet and making sure it has all its shots again, making sure it didn't bite somebody in the last year, making sure it wasn't quarantined, making sure it didn't bite an animal? Most people don't. They just sort of go do an inspection, everything looks good, we run rent comps. But let me tell you something, if you're not revisiting the pet, I believe your owner is at risk, because you should be asking those questions. Huge issue. Okay? Thorough pet diligence means more pet owners are open to accepting pets. And lastly, larger pool of applicants means you get more people in properties, which means you get paid. All very important. Now, let's go to animals. That was all pets. Let's switch to, yes, question.
Revisiting,
how do you revisit? Are you telling them they have to fill out another pet screening, or how are you revisiting a pet? I
well,
can tell you if they've been paying rent.
Yeah, sure.
I can tell you if the property's clean, but if I say, did your dog bite somebody?
Yeah, great question. So every firm may do it differently. Maybe you have a form, for example, that you use, and the form is just a certification that yes, my dog still has his vaccinations. Yes, my dog was a good boy this year and didn't bite anybody. I mean, it might be in a single page addenda. I mean, there are other resources. I'm not here to sell anything, but there are ways to do that. The point is, not revisiting it is really the exercise that should be happening. For obvious reasons, right? I mean, how do you know if the dog didn't bite someone 6 months ago? I mean, they should tell you, but they probably won't. So if they don't, and then you ask again, now you got them twice. Because they didn't tell you when they should have, and then you asked and they said no, you're protecting yourself. Now let's talk about animals. Good question. They're ADA, fair housing. ADA is public accommodations. ADA is restaurants, theaters, this hotel, anything where you would probably go spend money, that's ADA. Okay? We're not really concerned about ADA, right? Not in the perspective for animals. We care about housing stuff. But let's talk about ADA. Public accommodations. Do you know under the ADA only service dogs can be dogs or horses? Horses. Miniature horses. Have you ever seen a miniature horse? Okay, I've seen one, and they're cute, and I would probably love to have one, but it wouldn't make sense. My girls would love it, my twins would love it. They'd be riding that thing up and down the hallway. But miniature horses are about the size of a medium to large dog. They look like they're not real, but they are. But ADA says that miniature horses and dogs are the only two breeds of animals that can be a service animal, period. Okay? Very interestingly, they have to be trained. Which means that if somebody takes their emotional support animal into a restaurant with them, that's not allowed. It's not allowed. The problem is, the restaurant workers don't know. They just see somebody with a fancy red vest on that says service dog, or because they bought it off the internet, and they're letting them on in. But under the ADA, it can only be a dog or a horse, and it has to have specialized training. Period. And there's no registration, no such thing. How many of you get a certificate with the dog standing up with his chest poked out? It's got a registration number. You go to a website, you verify it. I mean, it's a sexy looking certificate. I'll give you credit. It looks tight. Looks like you put it on a frame on the wall. But there's no such thing as a registration, period. These are for-profit entities that have created this, and they call them honor registrations. But under the ADA, no such thing. Okay? Now, let's talk about Fair Housing Act. This is where we live. Fair Housing Act. Fair Housing Act is housing accommodations, not public accommodations. Okay? Assistance animals can be any kind of animal. It's not just limited to dogs and horses. These can be pigs. These can be ferrets. I mean, it can be cats, dogs, obviously. An alligator would be foolish because it would present a harm. So, someone could try to pull that off, but you could deny that based on a safety issue. But there's no breed restrictions, what I'm telling you, when it comes to the Fair Housing Act. And they don't have to be trained. They don't have to be trained. Emotional support animals, comfort animals, therapy animals, these do not require training. So if someone comes to your firm and says, I have a service dog, you ought to be saying, great, I need to see documentation of the specialized training that your service dog has. And they're going to probably look at you like a deer in headlights, like, what do you mean? Like, well, yeah, you have a service dog, it requires training. What kind of training does it have? And they would need to show that. Chances are they don't even know what they're saying. What they're trying to tell you is, I have an emotional support animal, but they don't even understand it, which is another red flag. If they don't understand it, then are they really being truthful with you? Okay? So no registration exists, untrained, any kind of animal, fair housing. That's the complex space that we live in. Right? That's what we're doing. So let's talk about Fair Housing Act. This is under HUD, Housing and Urban Development, right? That's what HUD is. HUD manages the FHA. Okay? HUD is a federal agency. HUD does not make law. Congress makes law. HUD is an agency that interprets policy. In the state of North Carolina, I deal with lots of agencies. Education, Department of Revenue, Transportation. I know these agencies. They have agency leaders. They mean well, but they take the laws that we pass and they try to interpret them and do the best they can. But if they don't have a clear understanding of it, they just will make policy based on what they think it is, right? Now HUD is trying their best and I think doing a good job of what they have. But HUD will be the first one to say, hey, we don't make policy, we just try to interpret it. That's Congress, okay? Let me tell you about Congress. I don't know how many of you, I'm sure several of you know Congress, men and women. I'm very fortunate to know most of my North Carolina delegation. And I will tell you, we've talked about this topic. There is not one elected official that is willing to get on the front of the paper to go monkey with a situation where you could be impacting people with disabilities who need something and could be viewed that you're trying to harm them. That's the gotcha here. Because there are people that legitimately need assistance animals. They absolutely need them 100%. The problem is there's a large group of people that are trying to use that system against housing to get their restricted breeds in, to not pay pet rent, to not pay pet fees. They're doing it to beat the system. When you have the other group that legitimately need it for disability. The problem is everyone wants to protect the group, and we all would agree, we want to protect those with disabilities. No one wants to harm that group while getting the other guys. That is why this issue is here to stay. Because I do not see Congress trying to go touch this issue right now. I just don't see it. We would need HUD to maybe come in and interpret some new policy. And maybe that will happen. Okay? But the legislative process, I mean, North Carolina, I think we do things pretty well there, but we still take a long time. Congress will take even longer. I mean, you just open up any newspaper and you'll see that yourself. There's really very little case law. There are laws out there. HUD wants everything to be adjudicated, which is fancy for lawsuits. How many of you want to be a part of that test example? No, everyone's running like a cockroach and the light turned on. You're running for cover. No one wants to be that guy. So instead, you call HUD. If we put HUD on this speakerphone right now and call HUD in DC and said, look, we have a situation where we got this person with this type of animal and they have this certificate. Can you help us? Should we rent to this person? You know what they'll say? They'll say, we really can't provide you an answer. You just have to follow the test of reasonableness. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be credible. I mean, they're not going to give you an answer, guys. They won't, because they're not going to do that, and I don't blame them. The point is, you're kind of on your own, to the extent that, you really are, kind of on your own. And HUD opinions can change. You can go to one regional HUD attorney that tell you this. You can go to this HUD attorney that tell you this. They all mean well. How many of you deal with attorneys? Try to get attorneys to agree on the same thing. Right? No disrespect, they just see it differently. I mean, heck, look at property managers. We have different policies. We all get it done, but it's not the same. So this is what we're facing under Fair Housing Act, okay? Let's talk about definitional roles. You got to know who these people are. The requester is the person with the animal. So when they walk in your office, they're an applicant, but they're really the requester. They're requesting you to make an accommodation for them. They're called the requester. Then you have the verifier. The verifier is the person that gave them the letter or the documentation. A lot of people go, it's got to be a medical doctor. Not true. Medical doctors are one type of source, but not exclusively that. But that would be a third-party verifier. Housing provider, that's all of you, right? Okay. Service animal, these are ones with what? Training, that's a service animal. Assistance animal, no training, and these are all the buzzwords. Emotional support, companion, therapy, comfort. All of these are lumped into one term called assistance animals. So HUD says service animals or assistance animals. So when you hear emotional support, it's just a type of assistance animal, okay, or companion animal. Guidelines. Housing providers can. This is what you can do. You can establish the legitimacy of the requester's disability status. You have the right to know if they have a disability. That is your right, because they're coming in saying they do. And we're going to talk about how far not to go down that path, because there are some things you need to stay away from. But you have the right to understand their disability status. You also have the right to seek reliable and credible information to support their claim. They have to give you something for you to go try to validate it. If it's obvious, maybe my next slide, I'll get ahead of myself, but if it's obvious, if they come in with a stick and a pair of dark glasses and they got a dog they're walking, that is called an obvious disability. You're done. You let them move on in. Because under HUD, if it's an obvious disability, game's over. Okay? And we all would know an obvious disability. I mean, would you or would you not? That's what HUD's talking about. The other thing is called invisible disabilities. That's really a large part of the population. That's someone that walks in the front office, and to us, they just look like us, just a normal person, right? But somewhere they have a disability. So that's the difference, obvious or invisible. Okay? You can evaluate the information. I mean, see all the stuff you can do? Guess what? Your property managers, you're making them do this, essentially. I mean, that's what you should be doing. Someone's got to do it. But these are things you can do. Test of reasonableness, that's what HUD calls it. Test of reasonableness. You go ask a lawyer, that's a legal term. What is considered past the test of reasonableness? To me, that's a broad paintbrush. But the test of reasonableness is what you're really trying to satisfy here. And then lastly, every case is unique and different. If you have a flow chart in your office of how to handle this, be careful. I mean, yes, there are certain things you can do. You can say, so a flow chart will work as long as you don't start saying things like, it only is a medical doctor. If it's not a medical doctor, no, right? Because every case is unique and every case is different. You can't just automate this. You really have to actually look at it. You have to. I mean, HUD tells you got to look at each and every one of them. So these are the guidelines. Let me talk about advisable. These are things I would advise you to do. These would be the yes category. Yes, you can request documentation supporting the disability and the disability-related need. Just because someone has a disability does not entitle them to have one of these animals. There are lots of people with disabilities that don't have animals. Disability is step one. Step two is they have to have a disability-related need for the animal because the animal has to do something to ameliorate the disability. It's a two-punch package, okay? Verify the therapeutic relationship between the requester, which is the applicant in our world, the tenant-to-be, and the verifier. That's the person or the group that issued the documentation. You have the right to establish the legitimacy of that. Call them, email them, make sure they really have a license, make sure they are a professional, make sure it's on letterhead, and if it's not on letterhead, get a number to see if they're really in business. I mean, you have the right to establish that. I mean, it's a lot of work, but you have the right to do it. Confirm the animal does not present a direct health or safety threat to others or have a past history. If you remember that question, has it ever bit somebody? There's a reason you should be asking that besides the obvious. If it's an assistance animal and it has a history of biting and they say it bites, you have the right to perhaps turn it down because it could present a danger to the immediate surroundings. Well, how are you going to know that if you never ask the question if it has ever bit anybody, right? You can see all these things start threading together. And then lastly, review the issuance date. An issuance date from a letter from 2015, would you take that in 2018? No. I mean, I wouldn't think you would. It's not. Is that reasonable? Is it reasonable to think that in 3 years that someone doesn't have a new updated diagnosis? How often are you supposed to go get physicals? Every year. How often do you go to the dentist? Every 6 months. Everything usually runs in 1-year cycles. That seems to be an accepted, it's still a little bit vague, so maybe you go 15 months. But going 3 years out is starting to get, in my opinion, too long, okay? Now let me talk about the inadvisable. We could put a big red X. We'd put a big red X on this page. Do not ask them what their disability is. If you ask them, oh, you have a disability? What you got? What is it? What do you do? What's going on in there? I mean, you are, or if you're staff, imagine one of your property managers, right? These are good people. And they go, well, I need some documentation on your disability. And the person standing in front of them at the counter goes, you can't ask me that. I have PTSD. I'm a United States veteran. And your employee's like, ooh, okay. They're literally going to get rattled because it's not that they're scared. They're going, well, gosh, this person is adamant that I'm not allowed to ask that. But they can ask that. They can say, well, with all due respect, thank you for your service. And I'm not asking about what your disability is. I'm just asking for evidence to show me that you have a disability and you have a disability-related need for the animal. These are two things I'm allowed to ask for as a housing provider. And I'm just seeking documentation for that. I don't care what your disability is. I'm not even asking that. But the problem is people don't, and I don't blame them, they don't know how to respond because people get worked up very quick over this. A lot of times they get worked up because they're defensive. Why are they defensive? Because and I won't be as critical, but perhaps they're pushing the envelope, right? That's the political speak of me. They're lying. All right, let's talk about, here we go, obvious disabilities. This is the slide. If it's an obvious disability, you collect $200 and go to go. Like you just keep on moving. You say, yep, come on in. Because if it's an obvious disability, there's really nothing to research. If it's obvious, okay, that's very important. Okay, let's talk about privacy laws. HIPAA is a privacy act for medical providers. We are not doctors' offices, I get that. But the moment you take somebody's documentation, and a lot of the documentation does say what the disability is, by the way. I mean, how many of you ever read one? You go, Yeah, I mean, you look at it and go, wow, this person's got a lot of things going on. Okay, the doctor's just giving it to the patient. The patient brings it to you. That information is sacred. It is somebody's private record. It's as important as a social security number in all fairness. If you are scanning that puppy in a PDF and uploading it into your software or sticking it in the file, I would really caution you about doing that. Because one of your employees might know that person and see it in the file. Again, I'm not fear-mongering. I'm just making examples. But if you have it in a safe place or if you have protection around it, that's wise. Because these are sensitive documents. And a HUD claim is one thing for discrimination. Another claim is when someone comes in and says you violated their confidentiality and now
you've embarrassed them, and that's a whole nother can of worms, folks. So be careful with the documents, okay? Do not limit the list to doctors. There's no definitive list. Folks, I see it all. I'm not joking. I see speech therapists writing these letters. I see counselors. I see priests. I mean, I've seen it all. But under HUD, they say if there's a therapeutic relationship. So if there's somebody in a professional role that you can say it was therapeutic, then it's worth seriously considering. And if you just go, well, it's got to be a medical doctor, and I hear that a ton, especially in multifamily. I go into these leasing offices and talk to folks. They go, well, if it's a medical letter, we'll take it. If not, and I'm thinking to myself, you don't even know you are getting ready to get yourself caught sideways. So just know there's no exhaustive list. Okay? We already talked about training. If it's a service animal, you can ask for the training, some sort of evidence of it, proof of it. If it's one of the other assistance animals, that doesn't apply. Do not implement breed and size restrictions. That is a no-no. It doesn't matter. If it is a St. Bernard moving to the 3rd floor, you got to go with it, right? If it becomes a problem down the road because the tenant below is saying it's too loud, then you can maybe go down the path of financial hardship. But I would tell you there's no size and breed restrictions here. None. Okay? And then lastly, do not charge fees because these are not pets. Bingo. All right? Subjective issue. These are issues that are still what I call the gray area. Telemedicine. You know? How many of you ever called your doctor over the telephone for a prescription? Yeah, of course. And you got a prescription, right? You'd have to go into the office. So is it possible, is it plausible that a therapist in Arizona can really have a session over the telephone with somebody in North Carolina? HUD thinks it's plausible. I mean, it can be. You know, my wife's a speech therapist, and she gets on these what would you call them? Like, not Skype, but it's like Zoom or something, and she'll treat kids thousands of miles away, and she can do it right over the laptop. Teletherapy is real, telemedicine is real, video counseling is real. An out-of-state professional in New York issuing a letter to move into Georgia, I mean, it seems like, well, gosh, you know, how does that person in New York really know? Well, if they did it one of these ways, it is possible. So these are all subjective. If you ask attorneys, different attorneys will give you different answers here. What I will tell you is HUD has not really weighed in exactly on this stuff. Some states, Virginia, has put out some clarifying documents, but it's not law. And even if it was law, guess what, Virginia? You're not the federal government. Careful. I mean, North Carolina, there's only certain things I can do, but it wouldn't really matter at the federal level. And then issuance date, subjective. What's an old document? I see 12 months very popular. But if something comes through and it's 14 months, I'm probably okay with it. But if it's 18 months, nah. 3 years, oh, heck no. You see what I mean? But even that's subjective. Let's talk about insurance. This is a big one. Well, what happens if my insurance provider doesn't allow guard dog breeds and someone comes through with a pit bull? My homeowner, he may get denied of his insurance, right? That's a legitimate question to ask, right? So HUD issued a memo. Most people don't know this, and I do have the links for you. Okay, first of all, if there's a no guard dog, no pet policy exclusion in the insurance for the hazard insurance from the owner, and someone comes with an assistance animal, and it's a guard dog breed, which a lot of them are, can you claim financial hardship by saying, well, the insurance will deny him or her if something happens because it's a guard dog breed? I would just caution you. HUD issued a memo. Brian Green, who is now the Assistant Deputy Director of HUD, okay? He was there under the Obama administration, and the Trump administration has left him there. He's a really good fella. He's from Harvard grad, really nice guy. At the time he wrote this memo, he was Secretary of Enforcement. He has now been promoted, okay? So Brian Green, who's in charge, he's the guy that was at the broker owner a few years ago, if any of you were there, really nice guy. He wrote this memo in 2006, and the memo addresses this very issue. And let me tell you what it says. It says, if an owner of a property says, my insurance will not allow guard dogs, the owner has an obligation to make sure that the market that they're in, that there are no other insurance providers that will issue a policy that either allows the guard dog or has an exclusion for assistance animals. Okay? And you have to prove that you have exhausted the marketplace for that. And if you can prove that you exhausted the marketplace for it, then perhaps you can call it financial hardship and move on. But the memo goes on to say, it's only a one-page memo. The memo goes on to say that if an auditor, an investigator they call them, is called into the scene because this person files a claim against you and your owner because you said no, because you said financial hardship, and they come in, they're going to want proof of all the providers you called to see that you exhausted it. And if you are if they say, okay, yeah, you really did do that, then guess what? They're going to open up a case with the Department of Justice, who's then going to go after the insurance company because it's going to be a civil rights violation for someone with a disability, and now they're going to get involved, and the insurance company's going to come back and say, well, we didn't tell the owner that. I mean, you could see how this is a real cluster. So I would just caution you to use this as a reason, unless you are absolutely certain that your owner has exhausted checking for policies, okay? This is a really interesting topic. And the memo is there for your own eyes to go read. I've got the link later. Let's talk about, we're getting to the end here. Recourse options. Let's talk about recourse. Unfortunately, the recourse mostly lies with the applicant, which is really frustrating. The applicant's the one that can go, imagine an applicant who really isn't legitimate, gets mad and files a claim against you. Where's the justice in that, people? But guess what? HUD is going to investigate it. Now, you'll probably be okay because you'll be able to demonstrate what you did, hopefully. And if you do, great, you're done. But do you think that takes time, headache, sleepless nights, resources? Yes. It is a big old pain in you know what. So, but that is the requester, this is the applicant, can open up a fair housing discrimination claim against you. Even if they know it's fraudulent, they can. And HUD has an obligation to look into it. Second, pro bono attorneys. Let's talk about our good attorney friends. And I have lots of them. Lord, I work with a lot of them. They love doing charity work because I think they have to, actually. I don't know. And they do pro bono cases. They are looking go after big property managers just because they know they'll get it settled. So this is a real issue. Let's talk about you, the housing provider. What recourse options do you have, right? You wish you had a whole list of them. The reality is you don't have. Let's talk about some states. Some states have a misdemeanor penalty for service animal fraud. Service animal is a small portion of what we're dealing with. We're dealing mostly with assistance animals. Yes, we have service animals. But if someone says they have a service animal and they really don't, some states have a whopping $500 misdemeanor offense. What to do, right? The point is, yeah, you got a little bit of recourse there if there's fraud. There are no federal penalties for the requester. So if you get off scot-free, which I imagine you would because you all are great property managers, you're in NARPM, you're doing it the right way, okay, great, you get a release of liability, congratulations. Well, that's how are you going to cover all these resources you paid for, especially the attorney you had to hire to go handle it. And then lastly, you can go after property damage if they damage the property. But guess what? Can you go after tenants who damage a tenant property? Yeah. Do you ever get money from that? No. Chances of you getting anything is really remote. You can. So you can civilly adjudicate it through civil court, magistrate court, and go get a judgment for $2,000 for ruined carpets for 10-year judgment. Congratulations. That doesn't pay the bills because you're not going to get it. You know, in North Carolina, we're not a state that even can garnish wages. We'll never get it in North Carolina. So you might as well write it off. It means people don't even sue them. Then they get away with it. Frustrating. But okay, here are your options. You can do this. You can establish internal pet policies and do it on your own, which all of you do. You can have your PMs review this and try to do it for you. As an owner of a firm, makes me nervous. It probably should make you nervous too, especially after hearing some of these things. You can hire general counsel, and you can utilize third-party expertise. It's up to you. You've got to get it done, though. You have to do one of these. You got to do it. You got to evaluate your policies. You got to do it internally. You got to pay someone to do it, or if you have in-house counsel, use them, or go to someone else who's an expert. You have the choice, but you got to do it. What you cannot do is ignore it, because I promise you, I heard some people blare out from the back of the room, and it drives me crazy, but I just smile like a good elected official. Huh. And they go, if it's on a napkin, we'll take it. I'm like, what? If it's on a napkin, we'll just take it. We don't want to deal with this. Could you imagine selling your owner and saying, oh, by the way, part of the service you're going to get from me is if someone walks in with a napkin and says they have an assistance animal, we're going to take them. Your owner's going to say, well, I'm not going to hire you. I'm going to go to the next guy. But there are some people who are so scared to touch this that they really will take that. They'll take the certificate. They'll take the ID card. They'll take the picture of the dog in the vest because it looks official. It does. But they're for profit. Many of them are. Many of them are. Okay? Here are your HUD resources. And I'll share this deck with Trent. You've got the memo from 2013. This is the best, most recent correspondence with HUD about this issue. Okay? And then we have the memo from 2006 that specifically talks about the insurance breed restrictions. Those are two memos worth having in your bookmarks to have that. Okay? And then lastly, I think I have questions. I say vote. I always put that in my things, vote, right? When I first ran for office years ago, this is my 7th year in public office, I ran for town council. How many votes did I win by? I'm like, how many votes did I win by? I won by 2 votes, man. And I voted for myself, so I only really won by 1 vote. So, yeah, and if you run for office, you better vote for yourself. Lord, if you can't vote for yourself, yeah. My wife will not admit it. She refuses to admit it. So I tell people to vote because it does make a difference. Because had I not won that election, I don't think I ever would have run for the House of Representatives, and I really feel like I'm making a good difference in North Carolina. So, voting is not cliche. It really does make a difference somewhere. So, that said, I will answer questions. Anything you want to know? I'm happy. Yes, sir.
We had a conversation prior to the meeting, and I'd like for you to share with the group parts of our conversation about a site called PetScreening.com, and it's a third-party provider that basically shifts all this responsibility to this site, and we're not the bad guys, and we don't take on the liability of qualifying a pet to be a service dog or emotional support. Can you touch on that?
Well, so all I'm going to do is this, right? I served on the NARPM board for 8 years, and what we don't do is we don't self-promote. So what I will tell you is pet screening is a new endeavor that I'm involved with. I am happy to talk to any of you about it afterwards. It's free, no charge to you. But I'm not here to sell you. I'm here to talk about the policy. A lot of the things we do at pet screening, a lot of the stuff we talked about today, with or without pet screening, what I will say is this. If you do the things we talked about today, you're going to drastically keep yourself out of trouble. You're going to drastically keep yourself out of trouble. The question is, how much energy do you want to put in this, right? And I appreciate the layup, I really do. And I'm happy to stay here as long as necessary to talk about it, but I'd rather do it after this because I don't want to take advantage of the group. I'd never do that. Yes?
You talked about the private nature of the information you gather about the requestor. Can you share that information with your landlord?
Great question. So okay, repeat the question. The question is the information that you get. Let's say it is a doctor's letter, right? It's a doctor's letter. His question is, can you share that with your owner? Okay? What I would tell you is every state is different. I'm going to talk about North Carolina. Under the state of North Carolina, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our owner. We have the obligation to give everything to the owner, including credit reports and this type of information. Now, in our management agreement, we've identified ourselves because they've signed off on that. So if Georgia has no problem with you sharing that information, then you can and you have an obligation to. But I will also make sure your management agreement from the front end goes, anything we share with you on behalf of our relationship is to be protected. Because if it gets out from you, you're identifying us. So I would say yes, you can, because we do, because the state law requires it. But every state may be different. Okay? And I'm not trying to avoid your question, I'm just giving you the honest, that's the right answer. So check your state. Does anyone know in Georgia, can you share that? With an owner? Can you share a medical document?
The issue is state versus federal again. So the Fair Credit Reporting Act is national federal law, and just because your state says share it doesn't necessarily mean you can, depends on your interpretation of federal law. HIPAA is also federal law, so even if your state says you can, you've got the discrepancy there between what does the federal say you can or cannot share. Because from a Fair Credit Reporting Act example, I'm the guy that pulled the credit, I'm the guy that has to safeguard it. And when I give it out to that third-party owner on whom I have not done a criminal background check, I have put that credit report at risk and risk the identity theft of the person I pulled the credit on, I'm liable.
And so to take that, just to pile on, in North Carolina, we'll get our license revoked if we don't share that with an owner. I know because we refused to share it, and the state of North Carolina came down on us. We didn't get in trouble, but they slapped our wrist and said, we realize why you would do this, but your responsibility with your brokerage license to do this. So for me, it's a matter of being in business. And if the feds came in, I would say, my state required me. What else can I do? And our legal counsel is comfortable with that position because it would show the discrepancy. It is complicated. I mean, that's the point of this whole stuff. It is complicated, you know? I would say I would do that as a last resort. I would do that as an absolute last resort. You know, I would. What else?
Mike right here.
Oh, yes. Okay, Mike.
It's kind of a question observation. You made the point that Congress makes the law and the Department of HUD interprets that law, but there's not been any real changes to fair housing law. So really what we're talking about is departmental interpretation.
Yes, it is.
So, and what I'm saying, kind of like the vote, is the department thinks mostly about multifamily. They don't really think about us. They think about the hedge fund owners. They don't think about the private individual. But I think we made a lot of headway in Las Vegas last year when they started hearing there's a whole different kind of landlord and a whole different kind of issue. So in the way that we're talking about voting, NARPM can start to be a little bit more politically active and start to influence the Secretary of HUD to try and create some different reasonable policies, like defining more accurately what a caregiver is. not my chiropractor, and you may have an MD, but my pediatrician who doesn't have any counseling experience doesn't necessarily have the capability of saying I need an emotional support animal. So there's some things that we could probably do as a group to try and influence the Secretary of HUD, to influence the investigators, to make our life a little bit easier, because the rules will be clear. Right now, what they're looking for is the rules to be resolved by a judge, so that they'll have court precedent, and none of us can afford to be that defendant.
And they're looking for data. The HUD will tell you they're looking for data. So if you have good data that you can collate, or I've asked NARPM to collect the data, you can share to show how many of these people really have guard dog breeds that are magically appearing with these certificates or whatever. That helps. I read an article, I took a screenshot of it. The National Disability Rights Network, which advocates on behalf of people with disabilities, is sympathetic to those who want to crack down on pet owners who misrepresent their dogs as service animals. But their senior staff attorney, so this is the problem, the senior staff attorney for the National Disability Rights Network, who probably has lobbyists, is in Washington, says that the law should be focused to educate only rather than to punish.
Isn't that what a law is for?
I'm just, hey, you're arguing logic. So, so they want to educate rather than punish, and the penalties, if any, should be very minimal. So when you have disability organizations going, we know there's a problem, but we want to err on the side of caution. Imagine being a congressional member trying to go hammer down on this. They don't want to fight that, which is why we have to rely on HUD to make these interpretations that could be in our favor. But HUD too, I mean, HUD works for everybody. They work for the people. They don't want to hurt the group of people this is intended for, and it's intended for people with disabilities. So they will err on the side of caution to protect that group at the expense of everybody else as we try to figure the rest out, which is why you just have to be very methodic, very consistent, and stay within the bumpers, right? Stay within the bumpers. But great comments. And NARPM is making a difference. They're hearing us. I mean, you got Brian Green coming to NARPM meetings. That's good stuff. What else? Any other questions? Okay, last one.
Is there a maximum of how many emotional support
No,
dogs?
there's not. There's not. No, I'm sorry, I'm terrible. The question is there a maximum of how many emotional support animals one can have? No, there's not a maximum number. That should probably be one I add to the subjective issue. You can, I mean, as sad as it is, I see people that say they have one, the letter says animal, but they're submitting 2 or 3, and then we'll return it and say, well, one's legitimate because it says animal. You know what they do? They run back to their provider, and they'll then make it plural so they can have all 3. It's frustrating, but there is no limit. Okay, I'll stay here for extra for questions. Thank you for listening. I hope this was insightful. I will share the deck with him, and he can share it with you if you want those links for the HUD memo. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this video training on managing the business risk with pets and assistance animals and service animals. If you want to know more about this topic, and if you really are looking for a no-charge resource for help, go to PetScreening.com. Or you can email me at info@petscreening.com. I'm here to serve as a resource to help you. Thanks again for watching and listening. Hope you have a great year.